Welcome to another episode of the Journeys of Not So Ordinary People podcast. I'm one of your co-hosts. I'm Dr. Joe Hamlett, and as always, alongside me is Dr. Dave Peltz. How are you doing today, sir?
I'm doing most excellent, Dr. Joe. Thank you.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. So, we're going to do something a little different today. We always talk about, again, I apologize. I didn't mention the kind of what we do on this podcast. And so, this is the personal, professional, and career development podcast. And so, welcome back for those who have tuned in to previous episodes. And if you're brand new to the podcast, then thank you for tuning in. So, with that out of the way, again, we are doing something a little different today. So, as most of you know, me and Dave met here on LinkedIn, actually, about going on 8 years now, or 9 years. So, 2016, right? Yeah. So,
Yep.
September of 2016 is when we first met. And so, you've probably heard us say that on the podcast many times. But what's really funny about that whole situation is we had never met in person until a
Wait,
couple of
what?
weeks.
Go a couple weeks ago. So
Yeah,
what's our
until a
topic
couple of
this
weeks
week?
ago.
What's our topic this week, Dr. Joe?
So with
I'm
that, that
chomping
was
at the
kind of
bit.
a long lead into our topic for today. And our topic is beyond virtual relationships. Okay, so that's what we're going to talk a little bit about today. And we really believe it's important. So I've introduced the topic, and as always, in our national form and format, I'll pass it on to Dave. So, Dave, what are your thoughts about
This,
on virtual relationships?
yeah, beyond virtual relationships. This is a great one. As you and I were talking offline just a little bit ago, to your point, we to reiterate, Joe and I met via LinkedIn. I reached out to him September 2016, and he's kind of like, "Who's this guy?" reaching out to me, and we just started, messaging and then texting, and then started having phone calls, and you know, then we started doing Zoom meetings just to chat once a quarter or something like that, to because we could, and those phone calls were usually during our 3 hour drives to our work locations when we were teaching or doing other things. And that's when we decided to create this podcast. And it kind of became like it became a ritual after that, that every week we're doing this. And we've been consistent for, I can't remember how many weeks, 100 and over 170 weeks,
So, yeah, we've been doing this for 174 weeks, with
174 weeks.
yeah, without an interruption.
Yeah.
So,
And this is actually, I believe, as we were talking, our first non-guest speaker recording for season 4.
yep,
So this is
yep.
this is cool. I mean, we're almost halfway through the season, so that's kind of a cool thing. But um, this whole time, to Joe's point, again, to reiterate, we had never met in person, and we'd meant Joe said it. We've mentioned that several times in our podcast, and people, our guest speakers on and offline, say, you guys need to meet. We're like, yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, we finally did it. We coordinated our schedules, and you know, it it was a good thing. I mean, we've had almost a 9 year virtual relationship, and there is a significance to meeting in person. And with that being said, there has to be the understanding that you don't have to do everything in the office together. And I'm going to kind of correlate this to school and my doctoral program. We didn't need to be in the classroom with the professor doing research. There's no point for that. I mean, they would watch us type and research on the internet. What's the purpose of that? Same as the show, Joe does the editing. We have appointments, meet with potential guest speakers. We don't need to be in a physical office for that. 99.99% of our work is virtual. And that's intentional because we don't need to occupy a physical space and be in that office space together because it's not cost effective for us. There's no additional benefit for us. Everything we can do remote and have virtual meeting contacts. That being said, beyond virtual relationships, we do believe there is a significant value in meeting once a year once every 6 months, once a quarter, or once a month for a day. There is a benefit to that. And when Joe and I did finally meet, he almost drove past me at the airport, and I had to flag him down. And I'm like, no, no, I'm over here. And he's like, oh, I thought I didn't see you there. And I was like, yeah, he saw me. So yeah, that handshake, that first handshake, yes, that does have a big impact. That physical in-person relationship took our relationship, our working relationship, our personal interpersonal relationship to a next level. And it was great. We did the same thing we always do. We talked for hours and hours and hours. We planned, we strategized, we told our stories, and that was cool. But do we need to do that every week, Joe?
No, to your point, Dave. We don't. And what we've learned in, especially in recent years, the idea that you can do so many things with all the available tools out there to do it virtually.
Mhm.
We've proven that again at the organizational level, the corporate level, the education system, all these things we've proven that we don't necessarily have to be in person to do these things. However, to your point though, that physical connection, that actually hearing people speak, seeing people in the actual presence, I think does add to that relationship. It builds on that relationship. Like you said, just a handshake is it's also significant, just in the idea again that you're actually touching someone, that they're real, they're flesh and bone. Because you're right, we've done this for 9 years, virtually and on the phone. But to have that human contact, it takes it to the next level. So again, as much as we've proven that we can do it virtually, it still takes some consideration of that actual physical contact, that physical connection, that eye to eye contact, and not miles away or apart. So today's point, we've proven we can do this. It still, I think, again, enhances that relationship when we do meet, when we
Mhm.
do hear each other. When like you said, we're sharing a meal together, just
Yeah.
having conversation. Those things again build that relationship and enhance that relationship. So,
Mhm.
like also as Dave said, it's not cost effective for me and him to try and do this podcast once a week. Me fly there, him fly here, pay for a studio or anything like that. That doesn't make sense. But to think about intentionally, when's the next time we're going to meet? When's the next time we're going to get together? That still should occur in
Mhm.
most relationships as much as you can. Again, if you're, I mean, you were across the world, you were in a different country, or I was, that would make it even more difficult. But if there is an opportunity to actually meet face to face, eliminate that virtual part of that, relationship, and to possibly make it in person, I think the relationship is that much stronger for having done that.
Yeah, yeah, and that's really what it did is it strengthened our relationship. It strengthened that bond. It strengthened that expectation and understanding of, who we are, what we expect from each other, what we expect from the podcast, from our business together, how we're going to do things going forward. But I'm going to reiterate again, like we've been saying, and even in a corporate setting, or a formal business setting, an office setting or office place, it can most of that can be done virtually.
Right.
Unless you're in a production and physical production
Yep.
environment, you know, most of these services, most of these tasks can be done remotely, and that will significantly and positively impact your budget because now you're not paying for that carbon footprint or that office space or that that office environment. So when we hear people say, "Oh, you have to be in the office," why? If I can do this at home, that's more cost effective. If you've already purchased the land and the facilities, what can you do to make that more beneficial to you aside from just putting a warm body in that seat? There's got to be some other way you can repurpose that. A lot of, many companies are actually they're doing shared office spaces now.
Right. Yep.
One day a week I come in.
Yep.
One day a week you come in the same cubicle, the same spot. So there's someone there. It's just that the rest of the time they're working virtually. Or like what schools do, like high schools and stuff, they rent out their auditorium on the weekends or their gymnasiums on the weekends. to churches and local businesses because it's unoccupied. They're repurposing that space. So for corporate environments and physical office environments, what can you do to repurpose that space and still give the flexibility to your staff to work from home? That's a big
Right.
trust thing. If you don't trust your employees to work from home and do tasks that can be done remotely, then there's something that needs to be looked at, and why is that breakdown of trust. It's not because they're not in the physical office. That does not build trust. That's just a physical working environment. Joe and I, and just like Joe and I just mentioned, for almost 9 years, we had never been in a physical office space together.
Right.
It can work. How do you build that trust? Communicate, and not micromanage. And that's really where it's been beneficial for us, is that trusting each other for almost 9 years. That's a good thing. So
Right.
trust your employees to work from home and see how you can repurpose that space. Maybe you can expand your manufacturing space. Maybe you can lease it out and generate an additional income stream, however it can work out.
Yeah, and all those are great ideas as far as again trusting employees and things like that, but I also see the benefit or the gain in once a week and once every two
Sure.
weeks is to get that team together,
Right.
whether it's just an in-person meeting, again just reflecting on seeing each other, maybe catching up with people, because there's so much you can do,
Mhm.
only so much you can do on a virtual setting, or some virtual settings don't allow cameras, so not
Yeah.
even seeing your peers sometimes kind of puts you in a, depending on where you are mentally, it kind of puts you maybe in a alone type of state, which is not always good for people. So just having that connection with people, like my office is down in our lower level, which is if I'm just here all the time by myself, that's not conducive in my mind, not conducive to effective relationships. So I do like to see people in person. I think a lot of us do.
Yeah,
So I
social
I think there's
interaction.
absolutely I think that's a necessity. So as much as we know we can do virtual and do a lot of things, not in the presence of others, I think it's still,
It's a
we
balance.
have to have that. Yeah, exactly. I just can't see myself working in, not interacting with people at a personal level. I
Mhm.
just think that we are creatures of, we want to be by people and around people. So I don't think it's as healthy if we're not. So
Mhm.
I still, as much as I know we can get done, outside of this office or brick and mortar, it's still, I think it's still, we require that human touch, that
Yeah.
human interaction, again, to see each other, maybe again to have lunch or break bread with each
Yeah.
other, just to have those conversations that are just normal conversations. Again,
Yeah.
think about what people did years before Zoom and all this virtual ability. That's what people did. They sat down and talked to each other. Even with, even without all the technology or cell phones and tablets, people actually talked to each other and
Yeah.
interacted with each other. They didn't
They
have
took
all these
flights across
devices.
country or across
Yeah,
cities
to
and
to see
to see
people, to
people.
and I think that's still important.
Yeah.
As much as I like technology, I think it also takes away from that human element, that humanization, that we do need. And
Yeah.
so that's why, again I like technology, but at the same time, you said it earlier, it's a balance on how
Yeah.
much we use that technology and rely on that technology versus that interaction, that human interaction that's so needed as well.
And that's kind of the duality of this conversation.
Right.
We're saying work remote as much as you can for all your tasks, but once in a while, get your team together and break
Right.
bread, have a casual conversation, have lunch together, to where it's not so business focused. Maybe part of it is, maybe you have a team meeting for half the day and then the rest of the time you're just getting to know each other once a month, once a quarter, twice a year, once a year, because that does have a positive impact. And that's really what we're going with, beyond virtual relationships. There is a duality to it. There is definitely a benefit to virtual tasking versus creating those those interpersonal bonds and trust with your teammates and with your supervisors and your leadership.
Yeah.
That human factor, like we talked about, it's not all joking and it's not all work. There's got to be that balance with those interpersonal relationships. And coming to the office every day does not necessarily build that trust. It's just a gathering place. And many
Right.
people, I've had, employees and peers where we worked in the same office space and we had fewer conversations when we were at the office than we did offline, just texting or messaging or calling, like you and
Right.
I. So, it is that balance. What does that balance look like? How can you best manage that balance and still be flexible with your staff, with your office environments, and with creating that bond from that social human interaction?
Right.
And that's what I loved about, when we met. You didn't leave me at the airport. You didn't drive by. You didn't circle around two or three times. Yeah, I mean, it was great. We had a lot of conversations. That was probably 90% of what we did
Right.
was converse and strategize and talk and get to know each other's stories again and again and again, as much as we've already talked about them. And that that storytelling in person has a much deeper impact than telling the story virtually. It's like you
Right.
said, that physical presence, that eye to eye contact, the body language. It's
Right.
we are social creatures, but we don't have to be social every second of every day.
Right. Right. And I go back to, worked for a company years ago, and I was having a conversation with someone via email, right? We're in the exact same building down the hall, and I kept getting my email pinging. This person's respond, reaching out, hey, um, this blah blah blah. Respond. They sent another. I just finally got up, walked down the hall, and they looked at me like, "What are you doing here?" I'm like, "We're right down the hall. Why
Yeah.
wouldn't we have a normal conversation
A
versus?"
2 minute conversation versus a
Exactly.
2 hour email exchange.
Right. And I'm like, but that's how far we get embedded into these, again, these tools that we have, but it takes away from that human connection and so again, versus trying to sit there and decipher what they're meaning in their message or how they're saying it or interpreting it the wrong way, why not have a in-person conversation like you said, so we can see the cues, we can see the facial expressions, we can see the body language, and that'll tell us a much bigger story than
Yeah.
does this email will. So that's when we talk about beyond virtual relationships and connections, that's what we're talking about. Whenever you can take advantage of those opportunities to see people, to connect with people, to talk to people, then we should do that as much as we can. Like you said, it doesn't make sense that, you can get a lot of things done over the phone or, virtual, but when there's an opportunity to connect with people, in person, myself, I think I'm a creature. I love that. I love the conversation in person versus over the phone or virtual, however we
Mhm.
do it. So I just, that's part of this conversation. It's just as much as you can. I think you'll get more out of that. Again, having a better understanding of that individual, actually seeing that individual, you being around that individual, those things matter.
Yeah.
All the senses kick in. Again, like now, I don't know what's in Dave's background. He may have be cooking up a steak in the back, and if I could,
I
and I was
just
sitting
might.
there, I'd be distracted, be like, hey, when are we going to eat steak? So just that cue there, not being able to have that same cue on this
It's
virtual platform.
humanizing.
Yeah,
It
it is.
really is. It's, especially in the world of all this AI
Right,
and, virtual conferencing and stuff, it dehumanizes us,
right,
you know. So, and it's almost akin to being in an office environment all the time. It's overstimulating, and then it becomes dull. You become numb to the person right down the hall.
right.
You know,
Exactly.
so it's maybe what we're really talking about is when we talk about beyond virtual relationships, it is that breaking bread, having those normal conversations, getting to know each other we already know how each other works or
Right.
don't work. How, we know how we play nice or don't play nice with each other at work. But what about that time to step away from that virtual environment, step away from that physical office, and get to know each other? Because you can be in an office, and you just said it, you're in an office environment. It's still a virtual environment. You got how many hundreds of people in that building or thousands of people in that building, and it's still a virtual environment
Yep.
because there's a wall or there's a cubicle or there's glass or there's a door or there's something that's separating you, and you don't see the person sitting right next to you.
Right.
So therefore it's virtual. You're physically present, but you're not there as a human being. Your mind isn't physically present with that person unless you poke your head around and say, "Hey Joe, what are your
Right.
thoughts on this?" And you say, "Hey Dave, my thoughts are this." If you're just Yeah, so there's different types of virtual environments when we think about it, in virtual relationships. That phone call, those emails, those texts, when you're right next to each other, you
Right.
know?
Yeah. It's just amazing me these days that we have become so reliant on all these, devices. Again, the conversation we're having right now, the again, the ability is amazing that we can connect from 1,000 miles away, but at the same time, that we're missing that
Yeah,
personal element. And like you say, even and that's the crazy thing about it, that you could be right next to each other in the same cubicle, but you'd rather text someone or send them an email versus actually talking to them. And that's
hmm,
just crazy for me to think that's why I say the situation where I had to get up and just walk down the hall where
yeah,
nothing much was separating us, but we still were having that difficulty in communicating even though we're down the hall. And so that's why, again, it just surprises me that we have allowed technology to dictate how we get together, how we communicate, how we interact, and again, taking away that human element. In a lot of cases, it's detrimental. It
yeah,
just people don't know how to speak to each other. So even
yeah,
when you
yeah,
do
yeah,
come in and start talking and have a conversation, it's awkward because we've been doing this, like you say, virtual 90 something percent of the time, and now when we're faced with let's talk to someone face to face, we struggle with that,
yeah,
which again, it's just really hard to believe that we've gotten to that place, but we have. In a lot of cases, again, some of even my grandson, he pick up, even when he was 3 and 4 years old, he could pick up a remote control, he could pick up a phone or tablet and go right to where he needed to. But then when I have a conversation with him, it's like one answer, one word answers. So
hmm,
how's school? Good. Oh, what'd you do yesterday? Went outside. I mean, just not having that interaction because they've been glued to that device, or that's just the way things are now. So it's just again refreshing to go beyond what we're talking about, that
hmm,
virtual relationship, and continue to build that human interaction relationship. So
yeah,
that's how we got on this topic. And
yeah,
again, I think it's relevant that we all consider these things as we move forward in our careers, in our lives, just moving forward in general. How do we continue to build those relationships?
yeah. And some of my best meetings early on in my career were stepping out of the office, getting out of those
Yeah.
cubicles, even if we're right next to each other in the close proximity, and just going for a walk and talking
Right.
about
Yep.
things. You know, some of it was casual, some of it was business, some of it was work, some was just getting to know each other.
Yep.
Sometimes it was just taking a break and sitting down and having a cup of coffee or, having lunch together or something like
Right.
that. But that social human interaction is detrimental. And to your point, when I came and visited and we did our thing, we did break bread. We did have meals together. We did
Right.
have casual times together. We did have learning experiences together. We did have interaction with other people. We did talk and discuss and strategize. I mean, those were my thoughts. Those were some of my takeaways. What were some of your takeaways?
No, the same. Again, being able to have a casual meal and have, conversations that I've had with friends here or family here, just again, those conversations that we don't talk about online. It's that, again, that more personal connection, the environment that you're in, being able to enjoy that part of it too. Like you say, just having a meal or
The
we went
physical
to
presence and company.
the
Yeah.
physical presence. Yeah, we went to several events, met other people, and just those interactions. Again, because immediately people are like, "Who is this guy?" When I'd introduce him, and I'd be like, "I don't know where he came from. He just keeps following me."
I pulled over to change my tire. Next thing I know, there's a guy in the back seat.
But again, that interaction, immediately people would look at me and then look at Dave and say, "Well, who is this guy?" I mean, some of them literally said, "So who are you now?" Just again, that physical interaction, that sparks that curiosity, that continued development, growing, building relationships. Because again, I did introduce him to a lot of people, and again, it enhanced that relationship not only with me but with them. Especially some people that had seen the podcast and they were like, "Oh, that's Dave." It was like, what is he doing here? And I said it again, man. I don't know how this
I don't
dude
know
got
how. Yeah,
here.
he just
Just
showed up, and there's a knock on my door. The doorbell rang, and there he was on my doorstep.
But even you could see it in those people that I introduced him to. They were like, "Oh wow!" And even one gentleman was like, "I know you from somewhere." Like the podcast is like, "Oh."
That's where I know this guy from.
So it was just that whole humanizing again, Dave not just being an AI on the end of the country and us doing this podcast, but people could humanize, shaking his hand and saying, I've seen you, I've heard you, and now being able to put your face together. So again, those interactions wouldn't happen if they just continued to see him on the podcast. So that was again a very cool experience for me to share, my home, my family, my friends, some of the things I like doing.
Those normal conversations.
Yeah, just things that we take for granted. Again, because we had never met each other, so that's what it's all about. Just enhancing that relationship, by again natural means. I mean, the biggest thing is Dave having to fly across the country, but outside of that, it was like you said. I picked him up from the airport. I seen him a couple of times. I kept going around, but but I eventually he called. He finally saw me and he waved me down. But so beside that awkward interaction, me picking it well, no, but just to have yeah, again that the fun, the human contact, that was very cool. So yeah, for me it was just again just normal. It was like like when me and my brother do something or friends here, it's the same thing. Just building it to the next level.
So think of the impact if you're in a leadership role or a management role or supervision role, how much you can positively impact the relationship on your team by just being present. Just taking that little bit of time to sit down and get to know your people, who they are, what they're about, aside from just work.
Right.
How much would that increase the quality and production and that relationship and expectation of each other to humanize each other instead of dehumanizing each other?
Right.
So we've got about 2 minutes left. This has been super fun.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Again, like many of our podcasts, we get talking and really having a good time. But that again, it's just an extension of what we're talking about today. Just enhancing relationship, building a relationship, and it came with that human interaction. It went beyond virtual um, relationship, and so that is very powerful in my eyes. Like Dave said, we were able to talk in depth, more deeply about different things that we had already talked about before, but even learn even more about each other. So that's what it's about. Like you just said, if you're in a position where you impact others' lives, why wouldn't you want to get to know them at a much greater level, and a more personal level, and then that enhances that relationship, worker, supervisor, manager, leader. That's again, we're just encouraging you to go beyond that virtual relationship as much as you can. A lot of
Mhm.
times it's not the case, but as much as you can, whether it's once a quarter, once every 6 months, once a year, there's still something to be said about having that in person interaction with people. So I'll leave it at that. Did you have any final thoughts, Dave?
No, I think that's a great wrap up. I was thinking the same thing. My mind was just thinking about, how can leaders interact with their staff and their, you know, managers and supervisors without it being like a formal meeting, being up on stage or,
Right,
sitting at a round table and just going around and just making it like a check the box thing or bouncing from one table to the next and just reciting the same thing over and over. How do we go beyond that in this beyond the virtual reality? Maybe it's a smaller team, maybe it's smaller groups that you're
right,
talking to, and maybe like to your point, maybe it's once a year, but you're talking to smaller groups more frequently that are different versus filling an auditorium full of 600 or 1,000 people and doing a Q&A.
right,
That to me is still kind of a sterile environment. So think about what you can do as line staff, as supervisors, as managers, as leadership, as senior leaders to get out of that virtual relationship, those emails, those texts, those phone calls, those virtual meetings, and have that physical contact, you know, and get to know your people, really get to know each other. And what can you do to save your carbon footprint? I mean, what like we said, there's a duality to this relationship. There's a definite benefit on both sides, but
right,
beyond that virtual relationship, a lot of trust can be built and a lot of understanding can be built.
right. Well, very well said, Dave. Well, we just want to thank you all for tuning in to this podcast again. It's kind of rare for us in these past couple of months. This is the first one, like Dave said, of season 4, where it's just me and him and not having a guest. So, but it was good to reconnect. Like I said, just a couple of weeks ago, he was here, and to follow up with that, visit with this conversation about going beyond that virtual relationship. So, if you again have been listening or watching our podcast, thanks for coming back. And remember, if there's someone out there may benefit from some of the stuff that we put out there, please encourage them to take a listen or watch one of our videos. We really do appreciate the support. Me and Dave, we're in year 4, like we said before. This is episode 174, and we've been pretty consistent. So there's a ton of content out there that we believe will help someone. And we've said this many times on here. Out of all these episodes, if we only impact one person's life positively, then we've done what we set out to do. So with that, I want to thank you for tuning in. And as always, we want you to continue being your not so ordinary you.